pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. Dr. Silverstein will be giving us the 11th annual Paul S. Richards, MD, Endowed Distinguished Visiting Lectureship in Occupational Medicine lecture. Dr. Richards was born, raised in Sugar House, which is one of the suburbs at that time of Salt Lake, now part of Salt Lake City proper. Graduated from Harvard Med, came back to Salt Lake City. They were needing a doctor out at the mine. That's the big mine that you can see out the door in the southwest part of the valley. A mine which was already at that point in time around 50 years old. So it's an unbelievably long duration mine. And he planned a whole whopping 6 months trip out there, but it turned into a career which grew into one aspect of medicine and public health and occupational health after another, dealing with anything from acute injuries to respiratory diseases to childhood immunization, one thing after another. One of the stories had to do with an unfortunate incident in which the worker fell in the shaft of the mine. At that time there was underground mining. It's now all a open pit mine that's now going back down to being an underground mine again. That's another story. But anyway, and this worker fell down the shaft and they couldn't find the worker, and Dr. Paul went up and down the shaft and documented where the person hit the walls as they went, and he finally said, no, you got to drain the sump at the bottom, and there was a grate above it, and they said, no, you couldn't be below that, and he said, yes, you could, and they drained the sump, and sure enough, the person had fallen through the grate. And of course, that's in a way a gory detail thing, but if you look at what's going on in the news today, it's relevant. It's relevant so far as the individuals who are the survivors or the family members of the Malaysian flight. Some of them really need to have closure. And that's what it was about at that time as well. So obviously the goal is to prevent those sorts of injuries and accidents, but some of them have happened. So our 11th annual lecturer, Barbara Silverstein, obtained her, I'm going to try to put these in order, her Master's of Science in Nursing from the University of California, San Francisco. The Master in Public Health was in Industrial, Environmental, and Occupational Health from the University of Michigan. Her PhD in Epidemiology from the University of Michigan. Her PhD is well known as being really probably the seminal work on the issue of occupational relatedness of carpal tunnel syndrome. Her career went from one location to another, including in California, the University of Michigan, ERC, Education Research Center, the Finnish Institute for Occupational Health. She finished up her most recent aspect of her career, most recent chapter at Sharp, being the research director, where she left that a year ago. And in theory, it sounds like she retired. Well, I'm told she didn't retire at all. She's now doing international work in ergonomics. So do please welcome Barbara Silverstein. Barbara, we also have a plaque.
Ah.
So,
you're not going to wait till after you see what I say?
well, you know, it's a plaque to memorialize this, and so hopefully...
Oh, this is beautiful.
Hopefully you can remember us and remember this moment and this couple days of your life with us. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So, I've done a lot of different things in my life, and but being at Sharp in Washington State for the last 23 years has been really. I had a minor side track to go work for OSHA. I was on loan to OSHA for a while, about 18 months, trying to get an ergonomics standard for the country. That didn't work out too well, and so I went back to where I was. So. Musculoskeletal disorders have been something that I've been interested in for a long time, for a lot of reasons, and I've really had the great pleasure of being at Sharp for 23 years. Well, now I'm into 24 because I'm there about 2 days a month. just keeping my little finger into my favorite project, which is what I'm going to talk about. And do you have any ideas? Let me just ask you this before we get started. Why do workplaces that have that are doing the same thing, you know, they're in the same industry, same size, all of that stuff, why would you think they would have different musculoskeletal disorder incidence rates? Any ideas about that?
Different population characteristics.
Different population characteristics, maybe. Anything else?
Maybe different relationships with supervisors.
Different relationships with supervisors, that's a good one. Health status, is that what you said? Health status?
Better understanding of the risk.
Better understanding of the risk. There are a lot of potential reasons, and those are some good ones. And what this project has been about is trying to figure out, you know, what's going on in workplaces and what's the difference between workplaces that have really high claims rates and low claims rates that are theoretically doing the same thing, and they're the same size. So, the Washington State is unique in that we have a workers' comp system that allows us to look at all kinds of data in SHARP, to look for trends, to look for new things that might be developing. We can compare what's going on between companies, within industries. I mean, we don't ever use companies' names, because that's confidential in terms of any of the data that we're involved in. But it allows us to really explore a lot of what are the differences and similarities in terms of injuries. And just to remind those of you who may not know what occupational health surveillance is, it really is it's systematic. That's the first component of it. This is the CDC definition, but it's ongoing systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health data for purposes of improving health and safety. And that's what we see that we're doing. So we use both population-based and group-based data to try and look for trends and new things developing. So SHARP, which started about 23 years ago, really what we're trying to do in SHARP, and have been for all these years, is really looking at the magnitude and distribution of musculoskeletal disorders. That's my particular area of interest, and really trying to understand what's happening with the injured workers in terms of how they view the risk factors on their jobs, the safety culture of where they work, and getting a real sense of that. And then also in every workplace, either we have in Washington, I don't know what you have in Utah about this, but it's required that if you have more than 10 employees, you have to have a safety committee, and you have to have a joint health and safety committee with worker representatives and management representatives. And so we look at, we've done a lot of interviews for both management and labor to try and get their ideas about why they may be having these problems and not. And so we have 64 paired site visits, and we pair them on the industry they're in, the subsector that they're in, and their size. And then high and low workers' comp rates. And we are looking specifically at the shoulder, wrist, back, and knee, and we're looking at exposures and safety issues, and then management culture is a really important area. And we have an organizational psychologist in our group at SHARP who's been really instrumental in helping us to sort of look at those issues better. And then what we try to do is, with the information that we get, is we try to disseminate it without any names of companies or names of workers, so that other people can learn from some of the strengths and limitations of how to go about reducing these disorders. And so the question for us has been, why do some firms who are theoretically doing the same thing have high rates, and others that are the same size and in the same industry have low rates? Got any ideas before I plow ahead? Yeah.
There could also be some pre and post care of individuals that makes a difference.
You mean like getting them back to work kinds of things? Yeah, as a post-injury stuff, yeah. Yeah.
I will ask a question about what happens in today's time period versus what would have happened 20 years ago. You maybe won't be able to answer that, but do we have higher expectations of how what an injury is to me today might have been
Versus
something
20
that
years
yeah,
ago. Sure.
wouldn't have been mentioned 20 or 40
Yeah.
or 50 years
Well,
ago.
I mean, and we looked much more at acute traumatic injuries then, and now we tend to look at not only acute traumatic injuries, but as slow onset kinds of injuries and
But
diseases.
expectations is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
okay. So expectations may have changed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think training and procedures, and then the management assuring that supervisors are watching to see that the appropriate training and procedures
Are being followed. Yeah. Can everybody hear what he's saying in the back? He's talking about really a management obligation, is what I would say, to make sure that policies and procedures are actually being implemented and followed, and that they can help reduce injury rates. Yeah.
A simple concept, but harder to measure, would be if you get a grip on the culture, how well that joint committee works, how well the interaction is between that employee representative and the company. I think it would be a very strong.
Okay, so the joint committees, the relationship between the labor representatives or worker representatives and management representatives, how that works would have a big impact on what's going to be happening on the shop floor. Right. Yeah.
You know, I think a very strong indication of, and it ties into culture, is human resource practice. How do how do you treat your people? How do you hire people? Do you just let anyone come in the door and you put them to work, or do you have drug screening? Do you have coaching?
Yeah, these are good. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Sometimes it seems like if industry is very observant of what's going on with their people, they'll catch, and they have a good relationship. Their employees will come early with a concern, and it can be taken care of early. Whereas if an employee is afraid that they're going to be blacklisted for having a complaint, they'll wait until the point where it becomes serious, and then it'll become an OSHA report.
That's a really good point. Really good point. One more.
I know you said one more.
Well.
I thought you meant me. All of the things I'm hearing come up to one thing. This is where I came from in my background, and it's strong leadership. Without the strong, courageous safety leadership, most of the things that have been mentioned aren't going to happen.
Okay, good point. Leadership is a really critical factor. So you hit on a lot of the things that we in this project have tried to look at over time. Let me just tell you about musculoskeletal disorders in our workers' compensation system in Washington. And they basically represent almost 30% of all claims and almost 45% of all lost time claims. For us, you have to have 3 or more lost days to be a lost time claim. And about 45% of all costs are for musculoskeletal disorders. So this is a really big issue for the state and for the workforce and for the employers. But by the same token, it's not always the same in different industries. And so if we look at different industry sectors, we see, obviously the ones that are at highest risk, or it looks like, or at least have the most reported compensable claims rates, are in construction and transportation. Now that's not really a surprise to anybody, is it? Right, okay. There are a lot of reasons why that may be true, but those were going down up until about 2007, and then they just leveled off. We don't know exactly why that happened. You can look at what happens in the economic cycles, and that may be some of it, but we don't really know why that happened. And some of the others just basically stayed pretty much the same. But if you start to look at things like healthcare, and I know this is a really messy slide, but one of the things that's of concern to us is residential care facilities are starting to go back up. And we've got some others that are going up. Nursing homes are starting to go back up. And if you think about what's happening in the society as a whole today, people are living longer, okay? So we have an older population, and we have a heavier population. And anything else you can think of in terms of societal trends that might seem to be keeping these rates from continuing to decline. Yeah.
People are working longer.
People are working longer. Good point. Especially with a bad economy, right? Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Aging workforce.
Aging workforce, yes, of course. Aging, I mean, and both, at least in healthcare, which is where I've spent a lot of my time, is that both patients and staff are getting older and heavier. Yeah.
With the reduction with the problem economically, many people were laid off, maybe more people are required to work more overtime.
Yep. Longer hours. The other thing is, for example, that I do know is that it's nursing schools, for example, are having trouble finding faculty. And so you can think what that back crunch is from having fewer faculty in nursing schools for training nurses. And then you have the older, heavier, double population issues. Okay, yeah.
I guess I also have to wonder, we used to be an eight-hour day society.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, most
10,
people
12.
I run into, they're working 10s and 12s and
Right.
some even more.
Yeah. In hospitals, for example, they're largely 12-hour shifts. Yeah. At least in Washington State. Okay, good. Okay, so then the other thing that we're doing in this project and trying to understand what's going on in the world is doing these injured worker interviews. And so we'll identify potential candidates through the workers' comp system and getting people who have recently become a compensable or lost time case who meet our criteria. Then we conduct telephone interviews with them, and they're open-ended and discrete questions in two broad areas. And so there's sort of the background questions and how the injury occurred and their idea for how it could have been prevented and how the work is organized that may have contributed to it, and safety culture. And then we focus on specific musculoskeletal disorder risk factors during a typical work shift. And these are the injury rates for musculoskeletal disorders from 2000 to 2008, and the average number of claims per 10,000 FTEs. And you can see that construction, it's the knee, is the biggest, is an area of real concern. I mean, backs are a concern everywhere. They're just a concern everywhere. But the ones that I have in red, healthcare and social assistance, the back and the shoulder. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And then in terms of manufacturing, it's the hand wrist. Would you think that's related to repetitive stuff and postures? Some forceful hand-arm activity kinds of stuff. And then in construction, it's the knees. And that makes sense too, wouldn't it? Yeah, okay. So you can't really see this, I don't think. But so if we look, we do something in Washington. We started back 23 years ago, 24 years ago. We developed this index. It's called the Prevention Index. And really what we do is we rank order. If we're going to be within an industry, then we'll rank order within it on two issues. And if it's across industries. So for example, we rank order by the number of claims and by the incidence rate. And then we take the average ranks of those two things and divide by 2. And we come up with what's called the prevention index. So we're taking into account those two components. And it's really worked relatively well. And for those of you who know the construction industry, if you looked at where it says PI, that's the prevention index. It's the building finishing contractors who have the highest prevention index for musculoskeletal disorders if you look within that industry subsector. And we use that to help us figure out, okay, so where should we focus our efforts? And we really use the prevention index so we get both that number and rate to try and figure out, because we don't have unlimited resources, but that's what we've been using for like the last 20-some years to try and get ourselves organized in terms of what we should focus on. So in this musculoskeletal disorder study we've been doing now for a couple of years, this is Daniel, and he's talking to employers, and he's doing to try and get them on board to participate in the study, and he's interviewing injured workers. And these are some heartbreaks, I think. The injured workers, what we're finding, and I don't know if this has been your experience or not, but with injured workers, basically aren't able or don't see any need to talk about what the working conditions were, the risks that may have been present in the workplace that may have led to it. The vast majority of the interviews with injured workers, they talk about what they did wrong, or that it was completely unknown stuff that happened, and they don't know why they ended up injured, but they mainly blame themselves. Is that a surprise to you? It was a surprise to me. We asked very specifically. We asked about the equipment that they had available to them, if there were any, the work organization issue, anything you might think about, lighting, blah, blah, blah. And no, it's really, they just made a stupid choice, which I actually find incredible. But that seems to be pretty standard for them. And here's a good one. This is another one. When you work in a warehouse, of course you're going to tweak your back now and then. You work in a warehouse, your back is taking a lot of pressure. So he knows, like what's happening. I limped around the rest of the week in pretty bad shape. I didn't know what it was. And then I just finally made it to the doctor, said I had exactly what the book says. Just twisted the wrong way and it just completely went. But I really find that, and this is a construction foreman, so it's really like happenstance as far as they're concerned, and that they really didn't have any way to have prevented it or thought that anybody else could have done something to prevent it. Does that surprise you? No, you're shaking your head no, Tom. Yeah? Okay. The other things that we're asking questions about, this is of management and worker representatives, if there's a union, the union representative, otherwise the safety committee worker representatives. And we ask these questions on safety culture, and that's about things like, are there incentives? I don't know what they use. Do you have incentives in workplaces in Utah? If there are no injuries, everybody gets something? Yeah? Yeah. Whether there's been process improvements to reduce musculoskeletal disorders, light duty, what about the sort of conflict and cooperation between labor and management on these issues? And so, a whole series of these kinds of questions. And we ask questions that talk about, were there any major shortcuts with health and safety that might have played into this issue? And is it a high management priority? Not, that you walk the talk kind of issue. And then do employees feel, free to report these things? And we've used a number of safety culture scales. These may be familiar to you. Is anybody here doing work on safety culture? You are. Okay. So what do you use in terms of your scales?
I've used Heinz's Nordic Safety Fund Scale from Europe.
Okay. Okay, good. It's really, there are a lot of scales out there. Some of them have been validated, some of them haven't, and some you make up as you go along, as you go about, you use regular scales that are out there and been published, but then you find, we're just not really getting at what's going on here, and so you come up with some of your own, and then we ask those as well. So then evaluating the job, it's looking at a variety of methods, and so the methods are the ones that have been published in the literature, are the ones that we're using. So, and they have to address at least one of the musculoskeletal disorder risk factors, relatively easy to use, no need for complicated or expensive instrumentation, and able to be used by a relatively large population with minimal interruptions to the workers. So as those of you who go into workplaces know, management really does not like you stopping people from working so that you can either wire them up or ask them questions or anything else. So we wanted to have the least amount of interruption. And then we wanted this instrument to be able to categorize job risks. And there are a number of checklists that are out there, right, that I think probably some. Has anybody not used some sort of checklist of workplace factors? So all of you have done something like this, right? Okay. So the ones that we thought needed to be used are the high hand force, repetitive motion, awkward postures, lifting, push, pull, and carrying, and then also repetitive impacts. And that's like using the hand as a hammer, vibration, environmental factors, and then the work organizational factors. So it's a two-step process. Step one is to determine the existence of any potential risk factors on a job, and if there is one, then to use a set of selected job evaluation tools to determine the risk levels of the job. And this is the important part. If we don't identify in our walkthroughs any risk factors, then we don't really do too much more. I don't know if you can see this or not. Can you see it at all? You can see it's a big flow chart, right? That's about all you can see. Based on the initial responses and walkthroughs, we really have a whole series of instruments that we're using to try and see which seem to, in the end, best predict these musculoskeletal disorders. And so when we get down to it, and we're looking at those things that measure or look at force, those that look at repetition, awkward postures, hand-arm vibration, lifting, push-pull, the basic cast of characters. And the idea is to then compare them to each other to see what's the difference between all these different instruments, and eventually be able to come up with something that is really streamlined that can be used by workplaces themselves. But this slide is just to show you that there's a lot of work that went into doing this. And so, like we use the ACGIH TLV for hand activity, Washington State checklists, and a variety of EU good practices, ACGIH, as I said, Liberty Mutual's push-pull, Kodak's ergonomics book, for those things. And, I already have this here, so I didn't really need to say all this. And the quick exposure from the UK. So these are the things that we're looking at, and we don't know which of them are going to best predict anything. But we're using them all, and we've put them all into a single checklist, and the idea is to see over time which best predicts what's going to happen. And so manual material handling, whole body vibration. Have most of you used these instruments in one way, shape, or form? So you're familiar with pretty much all of them, right? So this should be useful to you. Have you compared what the different instruments tell you? Has anybody done that? And what have you found?
Well, I was just going to ask you what you did from the manual material handling. Did you use the non-object lifting equation? Because of its complexity and the walkthrough kind of.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that they've, that the ergonomists have included it as they, as they go around. But we really wanted to use things that we thought people in the shop floor could use themselves eventually. And that was really what we wanted to test. So then there's a job sampling strategy. And what we wanted to do here is, you could be in a really big workplace or a small workplace, and there were only a few of us, so we had to figure out how to sample. And so we covered all the major representative jobs at a site, and then depending on the proportion of people who are working on them, we would use, like, for example, if 20%, we would use a minimum of 30 workers that we would be looking at for larger sites with more than 100 workers. And this is just sort of trying to figure out the best utilization of our limited resources, and again trying to use all of these checklists with the idea of coming up with some way eventually to streamline a checklist that anybody could use that would really have the most predictive value in terms of things to focus on when you're in any workplace. So far, 46 companies with more than 4,000 eligible workers, and close to 1,300 jobs or workers have been evaluated in our project so far. and the average sampling rate is about 31%. So the on-site evaluation then, and again, the ergonomists don't know whether they have gone to a so-called good workplace or not so good workplace. So we assign the same ergonomists, we pair them to, we have 4 ergonomists, and assign them to paired companies. So they would go to the high and the low company. They wouldn't be told which is high and low. It would be sort of obvious in many cases, but that's where they would go. And they have, then when they're there, at the similar paired jobs, and they all need to know, all the ergonomists need to know all the jobs in the assigned companies. And so that they spend a long time doing just a walkthrough to get a sense of this, and they do that together, and then they start dividing up to start really taking on doing all the checklist stuff. They collect force data with various methods, and same with vibration. They consider all the jobs, all the tasks, excuse me, can I go back? No! Sorry. Okay. There's a sampling strategy. Let me see if I can go forward. I can't go forward. Did I just screw this up? Apparently. Huh.
So,
Yeah, that's what I just did.
let's try this one. That's just locked. Don't know why.
Maybe it's giving me a message. Is it time to stop?
No.
Thanks. Okay. And so then we're putting all these various exposure assessment methods, into a tablet so that the ergonomist can quickly enter their data. And again, we're using like 6 different exposure assessment methods that are all simple, relatively simple. And we'll see which seem to be the most predictive and are most related to the kinds of injury rates that we see in those places. That's the idea over time. And these, can you see this in the back? Anyhow, these are the exposures that we're looking for. These are pretty standard. I think most of you would be looking at similar stuff. And the basic thing that happens is that if in fact you notice any of this in the job, then you go to the page, you click on it, and it'll take you to more detail. And so that's. Well, let me go back to it. Do you see anything that might be missing? Can you read those from there? Since we can still add things, if you see anything that you think that we're missing, it would be really great to hear. Each one of these, when you click on it, that this is happening, goes into more detail on each of those risk factors for the ergonomist to enter. What do you think? Yeah, Tom?
You're really enlightening. It normally impulse loading on the hand or on the legs.
On the legs?
On the legs, so jumping.
That's good. Yeah, jumping.
We related that to
I can't hear
we
you.
related that to osteoarthritis.
Oh, mm-hmm. Knees and feet. Okay, thank you. We can still add those things. Anything else? Yeah.
Just back then, you might put twisting as well.
I can't.
Twisting on the back as well as bent.
I think we have twisting. If you hit if we go into bent, it then asks, and when you go further in, it'll ask more specifically. But yes, thank you. Anything else? Yeah. Static postures we do have, because once you click in, then it's the duration becomes part of it and the frequency. But that's a good point. Thank you.
I assume overall work environment includes psychosocial and other factors as well as the physical environment?
No. Not in this one. We have some stuff on work organization. There are like 4 questions on work organization, but that's it. But that's a good point. Yeah.
Is it just kind of assumed that like PPE and everything is accounted for, that they're using that properly?
There's a place to record that. I thought this would open up more, but I must have left a couple of slides out that shows if you hit any one of these things, then wherever it says like R3, which is repetitive use of foot controls, then it will open up to that, and then it asks some more questions. But this is like the at-a-glance assessment. But I don't have unfortunately, I thought I did have one of the blow-ups where you could see the subset of questions if they answered any of those things. Then what we do is we provide the participating sites with as much useful information as possible in terms of the risk assessments and suggested solutions for any of those things we think were either what we would call in our caution zone or hazard zone jobs. And some employers will then, so we give them that report, and some employers will call us up and want to ask more questions and ask if we would come out and go through it with them in more detail, and could we walk around together. That's an exception rather than the rule for employers asking that, which is unfortunate because it would really be great. Because the idea is then to go back and see if, after they've gotten this report, to see if there's anything that may have changed or if they need any help with anything. And then, so we generate these site-specific reports in mail merge. And so far, this is as of May 2013, we've done many more since then, but this gives you an idea of the percent. We've done like 13% in agriculture, 15% in construction, mainly manufacturing, and healthcare and social assistance is where we spent the majority. And as of this is about a year old, but as of this May of this year, I think we'll be much closer to triple this because the ergonomists have gotten much more streamlined in their visits, and so I think it'll go well. So the number of workers involved in this, we've got, this is from the same time, is 1,285 checklists have been completed in these workplaces. And you can see that in terms of, we roughly categorize it as no risk, low risk, caution zone, or hazard zone jobs. And we're really not seeing, we're seeing caution zone and probably the ones we need to spend some time on. And the hazard zone ones, we are not really seeing huge numbers of what we would consider to be hazard zone jobs. Now, why might that be? Is it that workplaces have just uniformly across the board gotten better? There's a bias in these numbers. What else do you think might be going on here?
Do they know they're being watched?
Yeah, they do. They do know that.
Their participation's voluntary, so they're
exactly.
That want to show off that they're doing a good job.
Right. Either people who want to show off they're doing a good job or who want to know if they could do better. Those are the ones who are going to be most likely to want to participate in a program that is part of the State Department of Labor and Industries, which also has the consultants and the enforcement folks. And it's very hard for companies to sort of recognize that SHARP doesn't have any authority anywhere. So, they really could do things differently. But I think that that's a bias that we just have to recognize. I don't know how to overcome it. And this is just a second of the same thing, which is looking at the caution zone, hazard zone jobs, and sort of the distribution in these things. You see a lot of people performing frequent heavy lifting, but they're in specific industries. They're mainly in construction, and they may be in manufacturing, and they're in healthcare, but not in the others too much. Okay, so then if you look at the vibrating tool use, you can see that we have 65 above the action level, and 13 were above what we would call the hazard zone in terms of vibrating tool use. So I'm going to show you what we've two sort of pairs of large employers, okay? And A is poor, the A employer, the poor versus the good employer in that particular set of employers, and then the B, poor versus good, and this is from the healthcare sector. So then we look at the incidence rates, the exposures, and here's what we're finding. So this is still really new data, and we've got a lot more that needs to be entered. But this is in the large employers, which are 50 to 100 FTEs. And what you see are where the injury ratings are in the sort of good versus the poor versus these categories. So it looks like this is sort of working. I mean, we didn't know if this was going to work at all in terms of being able to distinguish, again, because the ergonomists didn't know which they were being assigned to. And so being able to look at this data now and see that, well, you know, it looks like when I look at this, the first thing I go to is, why is the knee bad for the A good employer? I mean, we don't know why that is. I mean, I don't know why that is. But so those would be things to look at. But by and large, those that are the so-called good employers, their rates are much lower than the poor employers. And in terms of finding hazards versus just sort of caution zone jobs, again, it's the same thing. It's in the poor employers that you find about 15% where you've got something going on, but it's not really great at this point. Looking at the back and shoulder, the A is poor, you know, AP is poor, and the A group is good. So it's the same kind of thing as showing up. And where you see poor is really quite considerable. I mean, I'm really looking at what's happening with the lifting TLV, and you've got 63% in condition A and 60% in condition B, right? So that's a big issue that needs to be looked at. So, to make a long story short, am I way over my time limit? Okay. So this is still in process. It's still being refined. We're learning what works, what doesn't work. We're learning what works with getting into workplaces versus what doesn't. And I think it's really important to be able to compare those with high rates and low rates to see if, in fact, it's a reporting bias in terms of cover up of injuries, or if in fact there's real difference in not only methods of how you do the job, but also in the work organization component and the management labor component, in terms of if management and labor are working together and they have a decent health and safety committee, that you're likely to have better things going on. But we don't know yet. We really don't know, and we've got 2 more years of doing this particular project. And so while we have 2 more years, there may be some stuff we're going to get rid of because we see no variance. I mean, in some of the measures that we're looking at, there's just no variance, and so the point of continuing to get that stuff isn't really clear. But there may be an opportunity for us to look at new things, or at things we haven't looked at yet. And I'd be very interested in hearing your suggestions about what you think we should be looking at if we had the opportunity to do so in these different high injury rate and low injury rate folks. Any ideas? Yeah.
Even though there was a strong bias in participation with companies that would tend to be good, looking to improve, the striving to do best, there still were relatively low rates of jobs that seem hazardous. Do you think that might be personal characteristics driving risk for some of these jobs?
It's a possibility. It would be, I think, hard for us to include those if we're going to do these, plant-wide studies. But it's possible. It also could be. It could be if once we're able to include sort of management worker relations in the mix, we may see something that really shows some differences as well that we don't see otherwise. We haven't been able to put those together yet, but we will be in this coming year. I think that's another whole issue. And whether or not there's actually a functioning health and safety committee. I mean, what if, and so we're looking at the health and safety committees because they're required in Washington State, but, you know, what if they're not functioning? I mean, maybe that's something also that really needs to be looked at. And I know that the enforcement side, DOSH, of the agency, the Department of Labor and Industries, the compliance side, I mean, they will look at that stuff. But they tend to look more at paperwork. And I mean, they do a good job at, you know, what they're supposed to do. But they tend to look at the paperwork to see whether or not things are documented. And they may do a couple of interviews, you know, if they think things seem squirrely. But there's not sort of looking at the overall organization, I don't think, as much as it would be useful to do, particularly in sort of a workplace culture kind of thing. We do have a whole different project just on workplace culture that's going on, but it's different than all of this. Yeah?
Yeah, one of the things I found, it's been a while since I've worked in the field, but when I did, we tried to globalize our training so that it was information they could take home to their families, and we essentially be thinking of safety and ways to protect themselves and make sure their family understood it.
So at home and at work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It became their culture, and they saw the benefit rather than saying, well, the law says we got to do this. I never got anywhere saying the law requires.
Right. I haven't noticed that the law necessarily does too much either in that regard. Yeah.
I've noticed that in some companies, people are more likely, because of the way the company's set up, to go to their own personal physician and just use their company-paid insurance. So you may not always get
Right.
that data from that. So what's considered a good company may just mask that to some degree.
That's an excellent point.
So
Sure.
if you have your attention, can we get that program somehow? I'd really love the tablet program.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be revised again, but you can certainly have it.
How do you do that?
Well, I think isn't Stephen Bow coming here soon? Yeah. I'll ask him to just bring it with him. And, you know, he may be willing to share it at this point. Yeah. Certainly you can have the, like, hard copy of it to do your own programming. But I'll mention it to Stephen, and he can make that decision, since he and Han Kim, who's no longer at Sharp but got stolen by the University of Michigan, they were the ones who really put it together in terms of how nice it is to use. And yeah.
One thing that jumped out, just kind of going back to your checklist of factors, and I don't know if you have any way of measuring housekeeping, but all the site visits I've ever done, you almost know immediately how the visit's going to go.
By the house. It's a really good point. Yeah.
And that would indicate a lot of the traumatic injuries, the slips, trips, and falls, and, you know, people bumping into things and whatever. And I think it reflects culture.
And caring.
Larry Martin from Martin Garage Door, one of the things he's always said, that's one place we traditionally do our field trips, had done when I was here at Utah, and when he checks vendors out, he always goes to the bathroom. If it's not clean, he won't do business with them. And so when I go to Martin Door, I'd always go check their bathroom. It's always perfect to see it. And he said if they don't have pride in that, then they don't have pride in what they do. And for him, it was a great business decision. And it really, when you see a place that has good housekeeping, everything else lines up.
Yeah.
And I think it helps with morale and culture and all the other things. And it might be a way to...
That's great. We can add that to our checklist. Thanks. That's an excellent idea. Yeah.
Byron, you looked at...
I mean, to see whether we're finding the same or not, but
I
sorry.
like that idea.
Yeah.
On a different note, have you looked at the issue of interactions? Because accidents happen so infrequently when there's only one risk factor, so there's multiple things on here.
Yep.
How do you deal with that from the checklist side?
Well, you have if you see these factors occurring, and then you go to P3, let's say, and which is P3? I can't see from here.
Back.
P3. Okay. Yeah. So the back is bent. You can go to the back, that back section, open it up, and you'll be able to see the other risk factors that may be present, and you can check those as well.
Okay, so is there some weighting or something that you?
There's
No,
not,
it's just a number of checks or something?
it's a number of checks at this
Strain
point.
is a tool in the tool.
Yeah, we have the strain index, right?
These kinds of something.
Right, right. Good.
Yeah.
You might have it under one of your supplements, but do you track work deprivation on work schedules over 12-hour days?
We do. We ask, and how many days a week? Yeah, yeah, and overtime. But we don't ask that of individual workers,
Right.
because this is not an this isn't an individual worker thing. But yes, we do have that in terms of our management labor interviews, that information.
Just a general question, how long would a complete worksheet like this take to fill out on a tablet?
On one job or on?
On one job?
I'd say, well, it depends on all the number of tasks there are on the job.
So assuming you had
Yeah.
the majority of them.
It might take, in some cases it might take 10 minutes, and some it might take a half hour. But rarely, unless they're really complex jobs and ones you have to come back to see again and again to be able to get all the different components of it, because they're not doing it right when you're there. Some of those may take longer, and maintenance jobs always take longer. Anything else? Okay, so we do a report and we give to each company, and the idea is that what we're going to, well, we've seen this already. The idea is to take the information that we get from this project and the examples that we get from this project of things that seem to work and that are associated with low rates, that actually look like they work and that's not claim suppression, is to turn them into industry sector specific little workbooks or booklets that people can use themselves, so that they can get their own checklists and look in their own workplaces and see whether or not they're finding similar things. And then the idea is to have sort of generic solutions to think about for each of these risk factors. And as we get more and more information, those generic solutions may become more specific as we get more information. So you can go deeper and deeper. When the ultimate tool is developed, you can go deeper and deeper in terms of the solutions and more specificity is the idea with more information. Okay. Okay, I think I already made it through all of this. This is all. Oh, I wanted to say something else. And that's that I have the opportunity, I'm on this National Academy of Sciences committee that's called BOSI, which is a board on human systems integration. That's what that stands for. And I've learned a lot since I've been on this committee about how you always need to look at least these components and their relationships between the links. Not just look at organization and then just look at technology, but what's the relationship between a technology and organization that may impede or benefit the work that needs to be done. And this is from Pascal Carrion, University of Wisconsin, and this balance model. And I think it's, when you're going into workplaces, I think it would be really useful for you to just keep this model in the back of your head or draw it yourself. And when you're looking for potential solutions or potential problems, to see where the connections may or may not be between these five. Does that make sense? It's really, I think it's really a useful thing, and here's an example. Like I do a lot of stuff in healthcare, but you can look at, if you look at where each of these components, then you can ask questions about these links. And so things like I'm looking on the near the technology. Do they have an overhead lift? And if they have an overhead lift, but this nursing person is lifting by hand anyway, where's the break in the linkage? right? And by having this kind of a, just sort of a system in your head, when you're going into workplaces, and just draw it yourself and see where there may be the linkage breaks, because that may be where you have opportunities for real improvement in workplaces. So, I like it. And here's my last one. It's gone. You got that for a quick second. Okay, that's it. Anything else? How am I doing on time? Am I over?
We have time for some questions, Barb.
Yeah.
One of your slides, you presented the idea that employees feel like it's their fault. But it's typical at least in a lot of work environments, typical American work environments, that you go to work and you really don't want to be at work a lot of times. So you have to get this mindset that I'm going to be here and I'm going to buy in to where I'm at. And the moment that you buy in, you take responsibility for your job, which includes, at least in the organization, you take the responsibility for getting yourself hurt. So it's natural, I think.
That's a really interesting point.
So I think maybe one of the solutions that I think may help, and management by the same token, a lot of times, and not wrong, it's just tradition, they'll distance themselves from the people on one because things are working, and their job is to make sure things are working.
Mm-hmm. And to keep the barriers out of the way.
Exactly. And so one of the ways to help, I would think, and this doesn't happen often, is to have management actually go down to the line and work on the line for a while. Get to know the people, and then they can talk to them, and the people can say, you know, I go home every night and take 4 heavy-duty Tylenol and sit and watch TV until the pain disappears and then go to bed. And then management starts to get in mind if they're down there working. I would too, because this is a really tough job.
Good point. Good point. Others? Yeah.
Did you say that you do not have your enforcement people doing this at this time?
Right.
So do you have a plan to bring those in so you can have good, bad, and really bad in your mix of data?
It would be, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to bring in the enforcement people without getting companies to freak out and not want to participate.
Well, I mean, they don't really have the option of participating or not participating if you're there in enforcement action by definition.
Yes, I know.
I mean, but this is, and it's the kind of evaluation you're doing in enforcement anyway. It would just be a standardized tool that you use.
It would be great if we could, the ergonomists who are working in DOSH, they're in consultation in DOSH, they could use this when they're going out, I think. They would be able to use this. But they're still, they have, is there anybody here who's in consultation for the state OSHA? Or nobody here? They have some real limit. I mean, they want to be able to, the ergonomists that are in consultation for the state OSHA plan would like to be able to use this tool when we get it fully developed. They think that this might be really useful, and we've shown them with no names of companies attached. We've shown them the kinds of reports that we do after we've done our analysis and that we send to the company. And so they would like to be doing more of that. We're not yet happy with our assessment tools, and we want to be able to refine them and get them to the minimalist set so that could be used in practice. And we really want to be able to compare. We took these tools from 6 different assessment tools, and we want to we have not yet compared the what we're getting for the theoretically the same question. But that's all in the future. But once we do that, we should be able to streamline it and make it available to anybody, actually, including consultation.
One other come in and you have a line of 10 people doing the same thing, did they evaluate everybody on that line?
I don't think so. You mean the OSHA people?
But
Oh, our people,
you
yes.
work with-
Ours, yes, they do everybody on the line. Yeah.
You mentioned there's a separate project going on that's looking at culture.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, has there been any consideration to couple with what your folks are doing with a really strong culture assessment at the very beginning? Because I really think a lot of what is filtering out in your observations could be rooted in the culture.
It's possible. It's possible. I'd have to think about how we would go about doing a full. We have some culture questionnaires that we ask both of management and we ask of the safety committee that are standardized.
And I think when you talk about management and labor safety committees and whether they're functioning and whether they're effective, et cetera, a lot of the cultural questions can drive and answer those questions. I've actually been a part of some very simple culture assessments where people anonymously answer questions using the little buttons, you know.
Yeah, right.
It talks about things like, do you feel comfortable walking up to a
Supervisor,
supervisor
yeah,
and
right.
saying, you know, that you're not comfortable doing something, or do you think your supervisor really cares about your safety? And it's very telling. In the end, it's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's good, thank you.
Any last question? One more?
So are these checklists, those are being done by the economist from your,
Yeah.
and have you considered like?
We're hoping to streamline it. I mean,
Have you considered like bringing in industry folks? Like
Sure.
safety people just do cost evaluation for each other's plan, or you got multiple plans to have them do kind of undercover boss, just be working in that area, get to know people, and on one side, you'll see how your tool can be
used.
maybe use how the accessible of these like line or the line
Right.
safety people, and also it just gives them the constant mindset what to look at in the future.
Yeah. Well, the goal of this project is to have something that's relatively simple and straightforward that we think really hits on where you have the highest risks, and then get better at it after that. But to have that available for companies to use as a tool. But we have to validate these things first. A lot of the stuff that's out there in these exposure assessment tools, some of it's been validated in different kinds of environments, and some really hasn't. Like the QES from the UK has not. So I think that's part of the plan. We'll see how far we get. But thank you. I mean, we do need to do it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your comments. I'm going to pass them on. Thanks.